Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Greg with Engaging History. Today we're going to look at a unit that is a lot of fun to teach and fun to learn about, and that is ancient Egypt. But first, let's start with the quote of the week. It's a short one. If you can read this, thank a teacher. Love that quote. Remember why we study history: to understand our world, avoid past mistakes, and appreciate other cultures. And as always, the lessons that I'm going to look at today aim to be both fun and challenging for students. All right, so if you're a teacher looking to create a unit on ancient Egypt, I'm going to go over a number of different resources here that I've put together for my Egypt unit. There are some topics that I think always have to be in an Egypt unit, and then there's some other things that I have here that could be supplemental if you have time. But the first 5 I feel like should be essential in an Egypt unit. The first one's a geography lesson, mapping ancient Egypt. Then we're going to look at the pyramids. We're going to look at rulers of ancient Egypt, religious beliefs, and finding hieroglyphics. And by the end, students will have up to 8 pages of handouts or graphic organizers to put in their interactive student notebook. So they'll look something like that, which I'll go over at the end. All right, so let's get into it. The first lesson, and you could do it in any order, but I choose this order for a reason. I like to start with geography so students get an idea of where we're looking at in the world and kind of know the way around the region. So we start with a blank Egypt map, and by the end they're going to turn it into this resource on the right. And as the teacher, you control the pace of the lesson, because every time you click, a new item appears on the map for students to put on their own papers. So here's an example of that. By step 5, when you click the button, it's going to reveal the Nile River. Students are going to trace it and label it as they go about labeling ancient Egypt on their map. After that, I like to switch over to the pyramids. This is something that students are always looking forward to. The pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza specifically, was one of the ancient wonders of the world. So for this lesson, I hand out this blank graphic organizer, and students are going to hang information about these 4 topics as we go through the slides. So here's an example of one of those slides, some background on the pyramid and how it was the tallest structure in the world for thousands of years. So when we get to the tombs of the nobles, students are going to write down some of this information, and there's a link to a YouTube video for more if you have time to do that. Then we switch over to rulers. Now, to me, it's a natural progression to go from pyramids to rulers, because the rulers oftentimes were buried in those pyramids. So learning about those rulers is an important part of studying ancient Egypt. For this lesson, I've created a graphic organizer to have students list and organize information about 10 such rulers. So of those rulers, the pharaohs, there were a lot of them. 170 pharaohs ruled a unified Egypt at some point in history. We're not going to look at all of them, obviously, but here are 10 that I've included in my lesson. And one example of one of those slides is right here. Then we switch over to religious beliefs. Similar graphic organizer with a little more room for information. We're going to look at 15 Egyptian deities. Something unique about Egyptian deities is that most of them are connected to some animal figure. So here's a little preview of what some of those slides look like. And then the 5th essential lesson here is on hieroglyphics. Now, ancient languages, to me, are very fascinating. They develop differently for different reasons. For example, the Romans have, with Latin, a lot of times it's straight lines. Like a U is actually shaped like the letter V. That's because oftentimes they're carving those letters into wood or stone. Whereas in the Arab world, oftentimes they're using a brush, so the strokes are curved oftentimes. For hieroglyphics, it's based on pictures, right? And instead of just teaching my students about it, I like for them to understand and to practice those as well. So there's room for that on these graphic organizers. Here's what some of those slides look like. Now, if you have time after these 5 lessons, I have a family feud that I've designed for ancient Egypt. There's 6 rounds. Here's an example of one of those rounds. You can break up students in a number of ways. You can have them partner up or have different groups. You could have 2 sides on the class. But in this case, well-known rulers. You'd have the answer key in your hand, and if a student said one of the answers, you'd click on the tile to reveal the answer. Or you'd click on the X if they got it wrong. Another game that I like to use as a front-loading game before we learn about the culture is Guess the Artifact. So here's an example of that. I show students a picture. Sometimes you can have them think, pair, share before they share out. If they're really struggling to figure out what's in the picture, you can give them the hint. Could you still eat it? So you know it has something to do with food. And this, in fact, is 4,000-year-old bread. Here's one more. If they're struggling, here's your hint. Do you smell that? And it is actually a perfume bottle. Okay, one more, and I like to throw this in earlier in the unit. But having students with devices looking up different areas in northern Africa, not just Egypt, but throughout northern Africa, throughout the Sahara. Here's a list of some of those items, and I ask students to find the continent, which is easy. It's going to be Africa for all of them. The country, closest city, and then the coordinates. All right, now by the end, you could have up to 8 papers for their graphic organizer collection, right? To go into their interactive student notebook. One that I forgot to talk about over here is some notes for John Green's Crash Course History on Egypt. And the last 2 here are the assessment for Egypt. All right, that's all I got for Ancient Egypt. Thank you again for watching. If you learned something or were inspired, please take a minute to like and subscribe. I will put some links below for other lessons related to this, some freebies, and to my teacher blog. Thanks again.